Okay, so I'm going to walk you through what our expectations are of annotation. So, I'm going to grab my paper first. All right, so this summer when I was at a training, like I train teachers in our course, we were talking about this step itself, and we were saying that, like, one teacher was annotating, like, what are we annotating for? And I said, well, I mean, we're not necessarily annotating for purpose. No, technology does not like me. Okay, for now, that's going to be as big as it's going to get. We'll figure out what's happening later. We were talking about annotating is, we don't necessarily annotate for understanding, which I feel like is what y'all have done in the past, is that y'all have annotated for understanding. We don't annotate for understanding because that's the assumption, is that you're going to understand. Now, will there be times where you need to jot down like summary or main points if it's like a complicated piece? Absolutely. But what we are going to do is we are annotating to plan. Can you see that? So when we annotate together, we will annotate to plan. Now, that's not to say that, like, when you read a history book or when you're taking notes, like, taking notes is different than annotating. There's a different purpose, right? Taking notes, you're annotating to, like, understand, or you're taking notes to understand. That's totally different than annotating a piece, right, for, like, this end purpose. So when we look at, like, you should have out your rhetorical situation for Bush, and when we look at it, we first found our task, right? So we've labeled our task, and I'm going to do that here just so that we have it. And then in the task, we found the purpose. And where did we point out the purpose in this? Yep, and we labeled that as what part of the purpose? The understand. If you labeled it as do, you need to change. So before we get into annotating, like, I feel like we always need a purpose, right? So I take the task and I take our purpose and I make questions out of it, right? So the first question I'll ask is, like, how does Bush reaffirm our strength? And then also the other question I can ask, I usually try to ask a how question and a why question. Like, why should our strength be reaffirmed? And that, like, hole is in the wrong place. So as I'm annotating, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for pieces of text that I think can support those ideas, right? Or help get me to understanding that idea. So when I'm looking at the text, I'm looking for a couple of things. I look for patterns. And remember, like, we're looking at rhetoric, so we're looking at language. So where do we find language? We find language in patterns, which I don't know if this makes sense to you, but it kind of does to me. I feel like patterns are melodic. So, like, when you're reading and you hear something that you're like, okay, that sounds like there should be something in there, or that sounds important, you may not know what something is, but you can tell that there's something in there. So we can talk about, like, what is in there that you see or that you like. That could become a pattern, okay? We also look at, like, repetition. And repetition can come in many forms. Repetition can be of words. Repetition can be in ideas. Repetition can be in structure. So repetition can come in multiple forms. I also want to look for lists. I also want to look for conjunctions. What are conjunctions? No, those are articles. Close. You're fanboys. Yes, fanboys, right? Conjunction, junction. So basically English has failed you. English and history have failed you. School has failed you, is what I'm learning. Okay, so fanboys, right? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those are your fanboys. Those are conjunctions. What do conjunctions do?
Lead into another idea.
Yeah, they join two things, right? They join two things together. So we're looking for conjunctions. If you need to write down fanboys in front of it so that you remember, you can, right? We're looking at our fanboys. The other thing that we're looking at with conjunctions, we're also looking at semicolons, colons, and dashes. Any of those things that we see, like if you see in a passage, you're like, yes, awesome, because there's a lot to analyze there. When we're looking at any of these things, we always want to look at like what comes before it and what comes after it. So the things on either side of it are important, but how they are connected is important as well. And I'll show you all those things. When we get to annotations, we get to look at, we have no summary. Because since we are annotating to plan, if you are spending your time, the limited amount of time that you have summarizing, then when I say, okay, you have 10 minutes to write a body paragraph, all you have is summary. And then you end up writing summary. Summary isn't wrong for us, it's just not right. Because I don't need you to tell me what something means. I need you to tell me the purpose of it, right? That will be skill 4 when we get there. That's the harder skill. So then what are we looking for when we're annotating? Remember, we're annotating to plan, so we're going to try to label. We're going to try to label the thing. What do we like that's in there? What did we find? What's important? What stood out to you? And then we're also going to connect it to some component of the rhetorical situation. And I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so step 1 of skill 2 is finding a shift or numbering our body paragraphs, right? So let's number our body paragraphs. We already have, so let's just go through real quick. So when we look, we are looking at 1, good evening, 2, today, 3, a great people, 4, immediately, 5, the search, 6, I appreciate, 7, tonight, 8, this is a day, 9, thank you. So talk to your partner and guess where the shift would be between what body paragraphs. We haven't read it, we've just numbered. Ready, set, go. All right. when we talk about shifts, this is one thing that I forgot to tell you, like when we were jotting down notes. When we talk about shifts, one, your shift could be wrong. The one that you predict could be wrong. And that, two, your shift, where you find a shift, may be different than where your friend or your partner found a shift. And that's okay. When we talk about shifts, we talk about between paragraphs. So it doesn't happen inside a paragraph. It happens between paragraphs. So where would we guess a shift would be? Before or after 4? Before 4? Okay, so between 3 and 4. So what is there when we were numbering that you thought, okay, that might be a shift? Okay, immediately. Okay, so immediately is kind of like a change in time for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a squiggly mark between those two body paragraphs. Now, keep in mind, when you do skill 1 through 3 test, everything that I'm doing on here, you're going to be scored on your skill 1 through 3 test. Okay? So, did anybody else find anywhere else? Where else, Jay?
Before 7 or after? Okay, sorry, before 7.
Okay, so you could mark one there because of the tonight. Okay, so you could mark it there. You could mark both. If as you're reading, you're quickly seeing that. That's okay for me. I don't mind that because one thing, this little like squiggly mark across a body paragraph or between paragraphs is your visual cue that when you get there and you're reading, it's your visual cue to go, have I found a shift yet? If not, then you just keep reading until you find that shift. When you find a shift, then you shift, right? So that's what we do it there. Now, I don't mind if you mark 2 or if you predict 3, that's fine. One shift in our passages. How many body paragraphs did I tell you to write when we wrote our essay?
It was just like 1 page. Or
2 body paragraphs. That was it. It was an intro, 2 paragraphs, and a conclusion, right? Why do we do 2 body paragraphs? Because and this is going to be when we get into skill 3, we're going to find a shift. Before the shift is going to be, everything before the shift is going to go into body paragraph 1. Everything after the shift is going to go into body paragraph 2. We will talk about later what happens if you find 2 shifts. What do we do now? Okay, so now that we predicted, now let's read. Here's what I'm going to do. I am going to read like the first body paragraph, then we're going to go back and we're going to talk. What I have to do for you is I have to teach you what to see because y'all don't know what you're looking for, right? So I have to teach you what to see. So today I'm going to start that with you. Tomorrow I'll finish. The next piece you go into, Obama, I've already gone through and underlined stuff and bolded things so that when you go in and read, now you'll go, okay, Smith marked that. What do I need to find in there that is important? Okay, so I'm kind of like guiding you in what to see and things. Now, the way that I'm going to read it is I'm going to read a body paragraph and then we're going to go back and annotate together. You'll have to figure out over the next like week or so, what do you like doing? Do you like reading like a couple of sentences and then finding what you need to mark? Do you like reading a whole body paragraph and then finding what you need to mark? I say like reading more than a body paragraph, you're wasting time if you read more than that because then you have to go back and find the things that you want to find, right? You'll make connection between body paragraphs as you read, right? So you just have to find kind of what works best for you. So, good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist attacks. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat, but they have failed. Our country is strong. Okay, So I'm going to go back. So I look at good evening. Now, I don't say skip, but when you're talking about a formal address and it starts at the beginning of an address and it's not like excerpted out, typically you will find some kind of formal greeting in the beginning, right? Whether it's a good evening, whether it's a letter to a son, my dear son, whether it is like we'll see with Obama, like an inaugural address, like thanking all the people that are there, the past presidents and whatever. That is important, but for me, I don't feel like there's a whole lot of like something to write about there, so I kind of just look past it and move forward. I'm not saying that's all the time, but sometimes. So we're just going to move past good evening because that's how you greet people. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist attacks. Turn to your partner. What did I tell you to look for that you see in there that stands out? I don't need to know what it means. I just need to know what you see. Turn to your partner. You got 30 seconds. Go.
The same word, but like the same use of like and yeah.
All right. Talk to me. What do we see? Catherine.
Repetition in the word hour.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to circle hour. What I'm noticing is I'm noticing the commas in there, which suggests also. Okay, so we have repetition. We also have a list. Now, one of the things that I always find really important when we see repetition is it's not always, I mean, the word that is repeated is important, but what is attached to that repetition is just as important. So if we look at like our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom. So what is attached to that is important as well. What else is in that sentence, that first sentence alone? Jay?
He's using some strong adjectives.
Okay, like what?
Oh, sorry, not adjectives, but like he's like, I don't know the words, but he's using like really strong words, like deliberate and deadly.
Okay, so deliberate and deadly, those are descriptors of the acts, right? Okay. And they are connected by a conjunction. Really what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the conjunction, because then with the conjunction I can talk about what's on either side of the conjunction. Now remember, the next step is we're going to connect this to the rhetorical situation. So what components of the rhetorical situation can we attach these pieces of evidence to? Turn to your partner, talk.
Oh, and audience.
All right, what do we find? What components of the rhetorical situation?
Context and evidence.
Context. Why is it context?
Because it's like explaining the situation that they're in.
Okay, he's discussing like what happened that day. What else? Okay, why the exigence?
Because he was talking about how there were the attacks.
Yep. And that the attacks were purposeful. So that creates some exigence of why I need to speak out. Audience is obvious if we talk about the American people. That's the given in this situation. But I will say for audience, what is a specific audience besides the obvious? Anybody related to like American, like grieving Americans, victims of families? Who else did we list on our audience list that may not be as obvious? Caitlin? Okay, good. So you have the terrorists, and the opposite of that would also be our allies. And I'm saying that not that the like Americans or anybody related to that is wrong. However, it's obvious, right? Like, he doesn't need to tell Americans what happened because we already know. But for him to say it was deliberate and deadly is letting our allies know that we were attacked by choice. It was planned. So if we're letting our allies know that, that kind of puts them on notice, but also letting the terrorists know that we know this was like specifically at us, right? So, okay, so next. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. What's in there that we like? Conjunctions. Conjunctions. So we have secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. We also have airplanes or offices. We also have the semicolon. So we have conjunctions. We have a list. One thing I didn't tell you up above that you might see is you notice that when I annotate conjunctions, I put a heart around the conjunction. I know it sounds silly, but when we annotate things, we're used to circling and underlining. I put a heart around conjunctions because when I zoom out on that paragraph or even the passage, if I can see a pattern of conjunctions, it's easier to see like those hearts and to see that pattern. If I can see a pattern in the hearts, that's another thing for me to analyze, right? So I find a different way to mark my conjunctions so that I can kind of keep track of that. All right, talk with your partner. What are some things in the rhetorical situation that we can connect those to? Ready, set, go. All right, talk to me. What components of the rhetorical situation can we connect to, Tanisha? Okay, what specific audience are we connecting to?
The people who are involved.
Yeah, I mean like the victims and their families, right? So we would do victims, like the victims' families, okay? What else? What other component? Caitlin?
Obstacles.
Why? Yeah, I mean, it's the grief, right? Yeah. Anything else?
Still in context, he's talking about the airplanes that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a more complete context of the depth of loss that we had. That works for me. All right. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. I mean, there's nothing in there that like stands out to me, right? We don't have to annotate every single sentence. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. Now, let me point out one thing. I'm going to point out this dash. Now, realize that this is a transcript of a speech. It is not the actual like pre-written speech, so it is a transcript of it. Sometimes it's different, right? So the transcript, what does that dash show you that you can maybe infer happened while he was speaking? Do you think his speechwriter was like, I need you to say huge buildings?
Maybe he like stuttered or like took a pause.
I mean, I would say like it was a stutter because what would that show?
Emotion.
I think it would show emotion, right? Like that he was overcome. So I think like I'm going to jot down, and it's not every time, but I would say like looking at this, like this is a sign of like emotion from Bush. And I like rhetorical situation wise, I mean, I think that plays into his obstacle. And I think that shows us a little thing, like something about the speaker, right? About the empathy that he's showing. In that, we also see our list of disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. So we have another list and conjunction. The other thing that we look at is we look at like actions, right? So here we have airplanes, flying, fires, burning, structures collapsing, right? So we also have action. All right, I'm going to stop there. No homework for tonight. We will finish this tomorrow.